wọ́n kéré o, wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa, àwọn ọmọdé wọ̀nyí kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. I'm no qua, Osinachi. One name, Osinachi. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. Mama, Osinachi.
Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Àwọn ọmọdé wọ̀nyí kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. I'm no qua, Osinachi. One name, Osinachi. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. Mama, Osinachi.
Hello, everyone. Hello, can
Hi.
everyone hear me?
Yes.
Hi.
Hello.
Oh,
Yes, we can hear you. Hi.
okay. Yeah, I'm supposed to be the third presenter, but apparently we have a no show, so I'll be starting.
Okay.
Okay, no problem. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ayodele Jemi, and I'll be presenting with my mentor, Dr. Similade Seso. The title of the what we're presenting today is Past, Present, and Future: Historical Perspectives on the Development of an Indigenous Science Agenda for Africa. The spending much focus will be on Nigeria. And for the purpose of context, I would like to read out abstract briefly. I know a lot of people, I'll just like to think through before I proceed with the presentation. So our presentation about science, how science communication and science research has looked towards the global north for validation. So I just want to confirm if you can hear me clearly. I see that you are. Hi. Can everyone hear me clearly? Please confirm.
A little bit. It's wobbly from my end, but I think perhaps because of the rain, it's raining here. So
Yeah, it's raining. That's why. Sorry, it's raining. Okay. So the presentation is about science perspective on indigenous science communication in Africa. And so we look at how a lot of scientific research and education in Nigeria specifically still looks to the, and also how the legacy of colonialism is further perpetuated in this region in science communication and research in Africa currently. If you look at it, for many years after independence, a lot of the research that we do still look to the global north, and also it's still dependent on foreign models, even for validation, and even it feels like copied versions of all of these. So we propose that indigenous knowledge systems should be developed and used as seen as an opportunity to produce something that is a knowledge system that is native and indigenous. But first, to do that, we have to understand where it's coming from. And I will start my presentation officially by reading this Chino Achebe proverb. I think it's from the last book, There Was a Country. It says, an Igbo proverb tells us that a man who does not know when the rain began to beat him cannot say where he dried his body. The rain that beat Africa 400 to 500 years ago, from the discovery in quotes of Africa by Europe to the transatlantic slave trade to the Berlin Conference of 1885. So essentially, Achebe says that when Africa's trouble started from the balkanization of Africa in 1885, when fellow human beings thought of that, oh, these people are savages, and then thought to divide this place and govern people who they didn't even know. And also, this is the basis on which our presentation stands today, and that the colonial legacy in Africa still persists today. And the implication of all of this colonial legacy is that a lot of things, the master-servant relationship that was then still reflects in a lot of the things that we do now. Even though we have people who are native controlling the economy, controlling things now. There's still a lot that happens that has to be validated from the Western society. So we propose that there's a need for a campaign for radical decolonization, a need to champion an agenda to decolonize African science and science communication specifically. And so we also propose that the tools for basic science education, basic education and science education need to be decolonized, and also the platforms that produce and disseminate knowledge also need to be decolonized. And decolonization has become like a buzzword in a lot of places now. But we do not approach it as simply symbolic gestures that that are connected to reparation and restitution. A lot of the things that we see nowadays. We approach decolonization for the purpose of this paper as deliberate attempts that are led internally, that are led by campaigns from internal, that are strengthening internal systems, rather than look to foreign models and even request for reparation, which is a different campaign on its own. Then we approach it as a radical attempt at first understanding where the problem started from. So the idea is that Africa, and we rely on the idea of Papua 1974 in the book Education in Africa, it's an edited volume, and also Yanka 1995, where they approach science as the functional enterprise in Africa. And because of the over reliance on Western systems now, many African societies do not even know how science was in the olden days, before, in the pre-colonial days. And so Papua and Yanka believed that science was a functional enterprise. When they needed something done, they had ways of doing it, and they lived full, complete life. Just like many societies that they were also developing and evolving like many societies. This gives credence to Apia, which says that there is nothing like Western globalization. And also, if you look at a lot of things, the things that were happening then, they were archetypes. Western societies were doing things, and also societies in Africa and other places were also doing things. A lot of the scientific development that were happening across the world individually were human imperatives. They were necessary for the needs, based on the needs that people had. And also, if evolution ensured that people were responding to things also. So, Maldonado Torres, 2007, believes that coloniality is maintained alive in many facets of the African experience, in culture, in education, and in research. And that is validated by the kind of science education that is produced both from the primary system, from primary education to tertiary education in Nigeria especially. You find out that the language of instruction in Nigeria and other African countries are foreign languages. There is no African country that uses their own native indigenous language or any of the native indigenous languages as their official language. It is still the language of colonialism that a lot of African countries use for now, and not that they use it concurrently with other indigenous languages. The foreign languages actually have a pride of place. They are placed above these indigenous languages, and this thing persists in culture, in education, in architecture, and in a lot of other things. So the result of this, according to Okere et al. 2011, is that you have inherited and alien systems that have been proliferated across the world. And these systems are often disconnected from both from the past and the present, and so they lack efficacy. An example is and there are many examples of this. And sometimes you find out that these things persist in even everyday life. Some mobile phones that are produced get very hot, and you're unable to use them optimally in certain parts of Africa because of the weather, because they were not even made for hot weather. And in architecture, you find out that sometimes the kind of houses that we build in Nigeria do not respond to the tropical heat and even the tropical system. You find out that a lot of these still they are built to look like Western models. And also these things persist in culture. And if you look at what Okere said that these systems are alien. Alien is a rather strong way to approach it, because it seems like it's totally different from what obtains there or what should obtain. When you say inherited is important. That's another word that is used. Inherited is important because these are things that are offshoots of colonialism. It still feels as if there were some people that are in charge. And so you find out that this inherited and alien system also perpetuates inequality across the continent. They perpetuate inequality because you realize that a lot of people who live in rural areas, which constitute 52% of Nigeria's population currently, according to the last report, you find that people in rural and areas are often disconnected from the kind of things that we call development. And so you find out that because of the arrested development brought about by colonialism, even the people in rural areas are unable to live a truly indigenous functional life. It is as if colonialism came and disrupted the development system of Africa, and you find out that there is a jumbled system now that does not really belong to, that is neither indigenous nor foreign. It is not indigenous because there's an attempt to look like foreign people, and so you find out that you adapt foreign systems, like I said earlier. Also, it is not foreign because when you bring things that are foreign into a system, it's not practicable because of the weather, because of a lot of other factors, culture, context, and many things. So despite the several scholarly debates that critique the dominance of this Eurocentric knowledge production and science communication system, the status quo remains largely unchanged in education specifically, which is the focus. In science communication, which is the focus of our presentation. So these unequal power structures are central to the valorization of dominant scientific paradigms and the obscuring of others. When in universities in Africa, a lot of universities insist that scholars must have academic essays and research that are published outside Africa for promotion. And so a lot of scholars actually look up to foreign grants, they look up to foreign, because they look up to foreign validation, foreign journals, because the indigenous systems are not developed. The platforms are not enough, they are limited, and the skills that are available are not properly managed, and also they are made irrelevant by the system, because it is foreign systems that are looked at as the authentic one, in quotes. So the whereas in science communication and actual science applicability, Papua believes that pre-colonial Africa has a system that was learning by doing, a functional scientific system. And also it goes further to say that there were societies that were formed for several reasons, and that the secret societies, a lot of these societies, and I use the word cult in the broadest sense, I don't use it the general way of I use it in the sense of being a elite thing. So there were many cults, many groups that served as sources of higher education in Africa. The same way that we had basic primary education, now the colonial Africa also had systems that ensure that people learned about their indigenous science, and also they moved forward and did many things. So the overlap between science and humanities is another major problem that has to be solved for us to have to proceed with this radical decolonization agenda. A lot of approaches at decolonization looks at humanities and science as two different things, whereas it is the interweaving of these two fields that can give us true decolonization, because you need a proper historical understanding of what obtained, not to mirror what obtained in the past, but to look for ways of developing what obtained in the past and fitting it into the modern paradigm. When we say decolonization, we do not propose that we should look for the past and copy the past verbatim. We propose that the past should be looked at as sources of inspiration, and also decolonization should be rooted in developing of indigenous systems. So this radically, Carventer and Robert says that radically different approaches are needed to understand, communicate, and propagate these unique scientific paradigms in egalitarian yet explicit ways. And egalitarian in the sense that there has to be equality, and a lot of things have to change. So most of the work of decolonization we propose lies in deconstructing Eurocentric mental models that inform education in Africa. Beyond the languages I mentioned earlier, you find out that the systems that we also teach also look up to foreign systems. A lot of theories that are used in our models are not applicable to African context. There's been a lot of work to develop indigenous systems, especially by scholars from the first. There were more scholars doing such kind of work in the first generation of African modern higher education. I mean modern by saying independence and the latter ends of colonialism. The research that was done by indigenous scholars then were inspired a lot by, even though some of them were inspired by anthropological system, but they were also inspired by indigenous system based on the understanding. But the bulk of the work that is being done now still look to the West and use these foreign theories and Eurocentric mental image. So the one notable example of a decolonization project is the IFES 6-year primary project that started in 1970 and ended in 1978, led by Babs Aliu Fafunwa, a former Minister of Education in Nigeria. And what the 6-year primary education project did was to train children, primary school children in their local indigenous languages, was to teach them science and other things in their indigenous languages. And this program was largely successful. And the research shows that so they separated some that were taught in English, while some were taught in Yoruba, their indigenous languages. And they realized that the ones who were taught in their indigenous language even did better than the ones who were taught in English. Because if we think about it, in most societies that are not, things are changing now, but in most societies, the languages of instruction, the languages of relationships in social groups like the churches, mosques, and other religious organizations, in the families and in the area and outside the classroom where the indigenous languages. It is only in the classroom that students use English. So what teaching in English does to students, was that it made them separate what they were learning in class from their actual life. They saw English as a language of code, and everything that they were learning was just code. And also, when they got out, they spoke their indigenous language and lived life. So what the Epistemology primary project did was to combine the both, such that the scientific things that they learned in class in their indigenous language were functional outside of the classroom, and they were able to apply it, share with their parents, share in other places. And because of political indecisiveness and the lack of political willpower, this project was discontinued. So there are 4 ways which we propose that the African research and science communication should be decolonized. The first is theory. A lot of theoretical, there's need for investment in theoretical research that are based on indigenous paradigms. Assumptions that frame applicability of theory of research in indigenous systems, and also rely a lot on indigenous frames. Example are some of these grand theories. Like I said earlier in the presentation, a lot of the things, theories and a lot of the things that we do are actually human response, human imperatives. When we talk about gender theory, when we talk about gender activism, there is no society that has a soul right or soul approach to it. What would apply in a French context would be different from what would apply in a Nigerian context. Even within Africa, you find out that there are points of divergences across Africa. And even within Nigeria, there are points of divergences. An example is that the way you would treat people who are in the northern part of Nigeria is different from theories that would apply in the southern part or in a lot of other parts. So there's need for theory that approach African research, theories that critique African research and African thinking. There's need for them to be rooted in local context. The second way that we propose is the method, the norms and values that guide the practice of research, the ethical standards. There's an emphasis on ethical standards, how you use data that you collect, how you approach research subjects, and all of these things right now. There's not enough emphasis on it in a lot of African societies. I'm aware that some African countries have these boards that approve research, that approve research before a foreign researcher would come. I'm not aware if Nigeria has anything like that, but for my research, there's nothing like that. Researchers just come into Nigeria and do what they want to do, however they want to do it. It's usually between them and the subject. There's no intermediary. So you find out that a lot of these scholars have extractive ways of approaching research. It's usually extractive. And also because it is extractive, they tend to love ideas, foreign ideas, over the local indigenous ideas. So these affect science communication because the teachers who train students from the primary and the secondary and the higher institution level, they communicate science in a way that only fits into foreign frames, in a way that only further denigrates scientific subjects and even the students sometimes. Also in communication, we have to strengthen indigenous systems. We propose that they need to strengthen indigenous systems and platforms, like I said, of production, of dissemination. And when we strengthen local editorial systems, authorship, and evaluation capacity, when it's understandable that there is need for scholars to publish widely and to also have for scientific research to have a global appeal. But it's important that science also be communication of science and be rooted also in indigenous systems. There is no reason why academic journals in Africa cannot be important enough to guarantee promotion and tenureship for scholars who are Africa-based. There's no reason why universities cannot invest more in research, why governments cannot invest more in research. And this brings me to the fourth proposal that we have for in this presentation, which is funding. Funding seems to be like the elephant in the room. And when we talk about funding, there needs to be a bigger level of investment to reclaim ownership of African research and scientific agenda. So governments across Africa have to fund research. The bulk of funding that goes into research in Africa now still comes from the global north. That is the Western world. And because a lot of this comes, the funders actually have a lot of time, they have things that they want to fund. They often have the cases where the funders have ulterior motives while they are doing research. And also, a lot of the data that are gotten from this are useful to foreign countries, not to indigenous systems. You find out that a lot of researchers are debriefed by intelligence services of foreign countries, whereas scholars in Africa just do research and there is a disconnect between town and down because they don't have any obligation to the system, to the government, and to the people because the funding does not come from the government at their own country. They come from the north. And so we believe that when the funding improves, there will be to strengthen indigenous research system, and also if it pivots to science communication even from the primary level up to the higher institution level, and this will improve the lot of Africa and scientific communication in Africa. So I will end this presentation by reading a proverb from Ghana, an Ewu proverb from Ghana, which says that go back to the past, it is not a crime. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation. Let me talk to the admin. Who is chairing the presentation? I guess we did not appoint a chair earlier. Did we?
No, I'm not sure who we did. I assume there was a de facto chair.
Okay, that's what I assumed too. We didn't. So we'll take questions and comments. We'll take questions and comments.
Okay, permit me to sort of add. Sorry, there's a message. Okay, permit me to add one or two. Yeah. So thanks very much, Ayodele, for the presentation. I think the voice was a little bit muffled, but I got much of what probably I'm familiar with the material. But it would be great to hear people's views on if we can optimize this project of this radical project of digitalization, right? How can practical steps. So we touched on the issue of language. What is interesting to me a little bit is that why was it abandoned if it seemed to work so well in a few decades ago now in Nigeria? If students were instructed in local languages, they were performing better than those who were instructed in English, why wasn't that scaled up? Why was it abandoned?
Okay, so the question, for in case anyone did not hear properly, is that the IFE 6-year primary project which I cited, why was it abandoned? So coincidentally, there is research on that, and so I think it is because of political will and indecisiveness on the part of government. And there's been a lot of criticism also of the project. So Nigeria has over 200 languages, and so they ask which one will be adapted. But the major problem is because a lack of political goodwill, indecisiveness, and also from on the part of the government that was supposed to sanction. But generally, you could say that it is because the government really does not care enough about education. And you find out that apart from ill-fated attempts at reforming education, the government sees education as something that is just static. So you find out that there's not enough dialogue on education, there's not enough periodic evaluation of how to do education, how to manage the education system in Nigeria. So that's what I think. Because I feel like the conversations concerning education in Nigeria by all stakeholders are not enough. They are static conversations, they are not conversations that are ongoing. Whereas education, just like research, should be an ongoing conversation. That's my answer to that. I've just been made aware that our chair was supposed to be Prince Vincent. Okay. There's a question here. Let me read it out. Okay, great. It says that my name is Olusegun Shueton, and I'm a scholar of African Indigenous knowledge systems. And I've written about the place of charms and amulets in everyday life of Yoruba people. The problem with indigenous knowledge creation in Nigeria, at least, is elitism. The major issue is not funding. It is a problem of perception. Yes, I agree with you. And what this comment, thank you for the comment. What this comment does is to strengthen the opinion which I said earlier that, and when I quoted Maldonado Torres, that colonialism is maintained alive in a lot of African systems. You find out that when colonialism started, one of the things that colonialism did was to condemn indigenous systems and make them feel inferior. And it is especially a lot of damage was done in the Victorian period. And this is when, in the 19th century, when they looked at indigenous systems as fetish, and you find out that they created words like fetishism, they created other outlooks that condemn these indigenous systems and indigenous amulets and indigenous ways of life. And so you find out that we have not moved beyond that stage. That system seems to have persisted. It seems to have persisted in thinking in a lot of ways that we look at indigenous systems. Such that even when you attempt to draw from indigenous system now, people tend to look at you like you are doing something wrong. Like you said, elitism. A lot of elite things still look up to the global north. And also, like I said, there needs to be a mental shift that looks at our indigenous system, indigenous ways of life as also important and as also valid ways of approaching life and doing things. Yeah, that's my comment. Thank you very much for the comment. Is there another question or comment? I don't think we have any other presenter.
Shagun has another comment.
Okay.
Chat.
Okay, great. He asked, so how do you define science? If science is still defined from a slanted and narrow epistemological perspective, then African science cannot grow. Yes, I agree with you absolutely that science cannot be defined from a slanted and narrow epistemological perspective. It is why with the presentation, draws a lot from Papua, because Papua, as approach to science, is not what is different from the general approach to science. It is difficult to approach science and some early things. Science has to be approached as functionality. To indigenous Africa, to pre-colonial Africans, science for them was a matter of functionality. When a child is growing, you know, a child is from a farming community, a farming family. The child knows how to watch the weather when a plant is ready for harvest, knows how to manage tools that were used functionally. The child knows the science that governs and guides the profession. A child from a hunter family understands animals, the seasons when to hunt, when not to hunt, the way to trace animals, and a lot of these other things. So when we want to define science, we have to define it first from a functional perspective. Foreign science is also functional, but the way it's been transmitted to us in Africa makes it look like something that is not functional. And this is because a lot of this was not taught in applicable ways. If it is taught in ways that it is applicable to indigenous society, then it will be functional. So what we propose is a merger of the two systems, a scientific system that is functional, that is rooted in indigenous epistemology, and also applicable to current human needs. That is my answer to that question. Thank you.
Okay, can I make I don't know, I guess somewhat provocative comment in getting us to think, right, a little bit around this issue. So one thing that has distinguished the Western science has been, you know, what they call the scientific method, right? So all of the rigor and all of the methodological, being systematic and documenting and making it, you know, in a very large extent, making it democratizing knowledge, right? So somebody does something, they replicate it, they document it, it is tested and either affirmed or by the next person. So like this system of just gradually building up knowledge in a way that is you know, more or less.
I think we lost. It's not.
Okay, sorry, I went up a little bit. I mean, so how does that you know? So the question is that is that Western science, or is it science? And if it is, like we say that is Western in quote science, then what should be the characteristics of, you know, an African science paradigm? Would they be similar to those? Are we saying that things like methodological rigor are not necessarily applicable to an African scientific paradigm, or you know, are there ways that we need to sort of refine what exists, or what exactly would an African scientific paradigm you know, look like in practice? And this is open to everyone. This is not to I think I find it, I would find it interesting to get perspectives on that. Thanks.
Okay, so is there anyone that wants to respond to that? Okay, so I think there's another comment from Soeton. Please let me read it also. A general question to the presenter. What is chemistry in Yoruba or other African indigenous knowledge, for instance? What materials and resources are available to teach core scientific subjects? Yeah, a very important question. So I'll throw it open, then perhaps I could attempt it. Does anyone want to respond to that?
Sorry, could you read?
Do I have to read it again? Did you have to read it again?
Okay, I can't see it on my chat, so could you please read it out?
Okay. Okay, I'll read it out now. I'll read it out now. A general question to the presenter. What is chemistry in Yoruba or other African indigenous knowledge, for instance? What materials and resources are available to teach core scientific subjects? Did you get it now?
Okay, a subject like chemistry, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure I got the whole sense of that question, but I think it may tie in with the comment I was making earlier. Chemistry, for example, did not start in the form that we know it today. It started with, people mixing things. So, for example, like a Procter and Gamble, just use a popular example, learned that they started by making candles, right, from candle wax, and then from there they built up into this this global thing that does all sorts of other products and substances and what have you. So in a sense, that this is the result. Chemistry, as we know it today, is the result of generations of the scientific knowledge building up. So the question for me will then be, what elements of African knowledge like do we have now that we could consider as having sort of similar potential, material to be developed. Well, I wouldn't say that it does not exist, because it does. But what are those things, right? What are those practices currently in digital? Okay. So sorry about this. I'm in motion. So for example, we've heard quite a bit here in Nigeria about people coming up with a cure for HIV/AIDS that is local, right? So this green leaf that we have here. The question is are there substances in that need to be extracted and studied and in the maybe using some of the scientific methods that we have now, but in terms of the know-how and the whole process, it is directed locally and indigenously. I think that there is potential to do that, but in terms of like a fully formed enterprise of study where you could then label this is African chemistry, an African informed paradigm of chemistry that somebody in level 1 in university today could study. I'm not sure of that.
On that, would see that we still need a lot of willpower from government. And I understand that funding might not be the problem, but because the government itself looks to importation, and it is why organizations like the National Agency for the Food and Drug Control and Administration Control, the NAFDAC, is not strengthened enough to be able to manage this system. And also, because of other perennial issues like poverty, people who do these things are often forced to just remain in the backyard. And because they would forever remain in the backyard because there's a market for them. There are thousands of people who are unable to afford the early expensive modern science in hospitals, which is supposed to be basic anyway. So they rely on this indigenous system. It has its shortcomings, but it works to a certain extent. And so back to what I said earlier, that there's still a disconnect between the indigenous system and what's applicable is applicable now. There's need to connect them. And one of the ways that we can connect them is what Dr. Seso said earlier about drawing, maybe extracting some of these things and just doing more research on them and just ensuring, because these things work. Some people say that it works. So the claim needs to be verified. And that is how science works. When there's a claim, you go ahead and verify it. So the verification might not be doable for individuals. It might be something that requires a lot of willpower and elitism from government. And like Dr. Seth also said, elitism is a major problem because people see things that are indigenous and native as things that are bad. So that's my thoughts on that. Do we have any other comments or questions? Okay. In the absence of other comments or questions, I guess we can end the session now. Thank you so much for listening to me, and thank you all for your comments. Really, thank you so much, and it's a privilege to share my thoughts at this conference. Thank you all. Thank you, Lauren.